Huh?
You can't do it. It needs to be organic. That was not an organic dabba-dabbing. This episode of Faster Horses is brought to you by Bill and Ben of the Flower Pot Men.
That's every episode. Hello and welcome to Faster Horses. I'm Paul Wilshaw at Paul Wilshaw on Twitter, and these are my co-hosts, Mark Sutcliffe, which is Marks out of 10.
Hello, hello.
And Nick Tomlinson at NT Illustrators.
Hello.
This is Series 3. Series 3! But if you haven't heard of Series 1 or 2, you can check those out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can find us in loads of places. Now you can get this extended version of the same episodes early by signing up to our Faster Horses Patreon, as well as one extra Patreon exclusive episode a month, along with other benefits detailed on the sites. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really does help the show, and also follow our official Twitter page at Faster Horses UX for regular updates, find show topics and interesting articles and random musings for the team. Also, if you want to give us feedback, send us some feedback. Now, without further ado, let's go on to the show.
Right, so designed by committee.
That's today's episode, yeah. So cue the welcome tune.
Faster Horses.
Perfect.
I always
Can't
wonder
one.
if there's something more to those. They're just kind of like, I want more. I want more.
That's how you know a good jingle, though. That's how
Yeah,
you
it
know
leaves
a
you
good
wanting more.
Yeah,
And also the sweet release of death.
yes.
In equal
Or,
measure.
as is more accurate, the sweet release
God.
of Nick's bowels.
Which,
I don't
effectively
know
the
if there's
same
anything
thing.
sweet about that.
No, it's very, very umami.
Yes. Oh,
Oh,
I was much more comfortable when we were talking about like just blood and gore and
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah, this
prior to
explains
this
why he
podcast.
shut the door on you earlier, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, this is interesting. Actually, our Patreon viewers will be able to see in the recorded version where we usually store the Tombola machine. Which is
Matt's in his
room,
little
yeah.
Tombola.
I've had to move
room
it aside to make space for other things.
He brings the paintings with him to make him feel more at home.
Yeah. This is it.
And also, as we constantly forget, this is for most people an audio format. So James Med is here this week. Say hello,
We've
James.
got special guest
Yeah,
James
he's on
Med
mute
once
opening
again.
a bottle of beer.
Hey,
There we go.
There he is. He thought he'd bother. For those,
walking in like that.
for those viewers who've recently started listening, James Med has been with us on a couple of our previous podcasts, the names of which all completely escape me, so I'm afraid I can't help more than
I
that.
did one on software,
Yes. Oh, yes, we did. Yeah.
which was a great episode, I'm told.
Yeah.
I also wrote and performed the theme tune to Faster
He
Horses.
did. Yes. James
Often
James
forgotten.
Med
Don't get any royalties
has
on that,
his,
do I?
well, it's all right.
I see that
Had a week.
Patreon money rolling in every month, and I'm like, "Oh, where's my
Thing is,
1 penny?"
We can't throw up our money in the air because it hurts as all the pennies start pinging off our forehead. Yes. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So today's episode is on design by committee. Now, there are 4 of us here today, and I think we should strategize how we make our way through this podcast in a roundtable format, each contributing their own design, but feel free to chip in at any point with your opinion on one another's strategies.
Nice.
All right?
Can we?
I've heard.
That sounds. I hate that.
I've
I'll just shout at once.
Are the best products made when everybody gets to put their
Yeah.
stamp on it?
When
Yeah, that's it.
And when everybody's opinion is made their way through into the product, I think those are definitely the best products you ever use. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone needs equal representation, whether their ideas are good or not.
Yeah. And don't forget, my sister has a cleaner whose daughter-in-law has been to design school. So can we have that opinion in there as well, please?
Yeah.
I had a goldfish when I was 13, and I won it at a fair. Every year the fair used to come to town to the Eureka car park, and they'd set up all the rides and the stalls there. And one of my favourite stalls year on year was the where you throw the bean bags at the cans that you stack up, and if you knock all the cans off the shelf, you win a prize. More often than not, that prize would be a goldfish. And one year I won a goldfish that I took home, and I named him Sonny, and he was a dear friend to me for many, many years. We used to play together. We used to have baths together. And one day, I came into my bedroom after spending the day at school, where we'd been learning about the works of Samuel Keats. I'm sure you've heard of Samuel Keats and his wonderful spellbinding poetry. But I came home to find in my bedroom, where I had many posters and vinyl records that saw me through my youth, that Sonny the fish had died, and he was there floating belly up in the water of the bowl that I kept him in my bedroom. And it's for that reason now I no longer like the orange that you've used in the
logo. Excellent. All right, so that was an excellent podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Drum kit button. Come on, rim shot.
Yeah, go on. 20 seconds has passed.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't. Yeah.
Oh dear me. That was excellent.
Brilliant.
My favourite one. As we're doing these nonsensical design by committee responses is when I've spoken to 24 people for at least an hour each about why they enjoy, what they do in their daily lives using a product that we're developing, what works, what doesn't work, the challenges they've faced, the ingenuity they've employed to work around it, and I've processed all of those findings, and I've turned them into a set of actionable insights that we could actually proceed with as a product roadmap, a true user-centered product roadmap. And I speak to the chief internal stakeholder and get told, I just don't think it will work. And of course, what do I know?
Yes. You're only on the payroll as a UX designer. So I guess this is probably a good point to just jump in and explain to anyone who's listening, what is design by committee and what we mean.
Just stop you there, sorry. To anyone who's listening, not to our listeners, but anyone who's listening, on the off chance that someone's bothered.
If I'm listening to this UX episode, UX podcast episode back in the kitchen as I'm doing the washing up, as I tend to do, and Drew's in the other room.
Okay,
she's got no choice but to overhear it.
I see. So listeners and parenthetical individuals is what
Drew,
you meant.
Why have you bought these noise cancelling headphones? Our house is so quiet.
Anyway, just thought I'd bring attention to that. Do go on. Explaining design by committee.
Oh, I wasn't going to do that.
Oh, right. Okay. Who wants to jump in then?
This is like the opposite of design by committee, isn't it? This is like negligence by committee.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't expected to present today. You'll have to move on to the next person.
This is design by committee. It's this is one of the problems with design, and I think it's a tricky balance for anybody to get. And I think as a designer, it's partly heartbreaking when you kind of like have design by committee and part experience. And it, and you kind of like, as a designer, you put yourself out there all the time, and there's no, apart from kind of like acting or things like that, or kind of like where you're in front of people, there's no other time you'll get critiqued or not critiqued, criticized more than being a designer, because everybody knows, like as you said, like, oh, the color orange, it's kind of an association for me, or kind of like, oh, I had this toy in the 80s and I loved it so much, or my friends wanted to play with it. Can we put this rubber button onto the website because I loved that? You know, and people have this really emotional bias to design among anything else, and even over kind of like copy or kind of like you know, anything. And like people judge you on those things. I think there's a website, and I think people rate Tesco meal deals, and you post your meal deal combination onto this website, and people rate you on that. And generally, if you're vegetarian or vegan, your ratings are usually lower than kind of like if you had a fillet of steak sandwich with a Snickers and cheese and onion crisps and a Coke, which will probably get a higher rating, because that's your audience, you know, kind of like, and
I was going to say,
that's the audience kind of like you're going for, kind of like, and it's weird, and like, why do people not know, kind of like, you know, you've got a target audience and a dog, and you know, kind of like, what, and people put their own personal opinions and their own personal experiences into kind of like their emotions of kind of when they interpret design.
I think you're absolutely spot on there, and it's that input of emotional bias, cognitive bias, any kind of preconceptions you have. But I think what's unique about design, about art, and I'd say even particularly user experience design. In fact, I've said it on this podcast before. Not everyone's a user experience designer, and I think everyone would agree to that. Everyone's a user of some form, in some way. And with this comes an automatic, certainly with a certain kind of individual, a sense of understanding, as if just because you're eating the sausage, you know how it's been made, to break out an old favourite analogy of ours. And so, yeah, it boils down to this idea that, well, I've experienced this. Not an acknowledgement that they've only experienced one side of it, and as such, because it's visual, because it's interactive, and I've got an opinion, not to mention all these other biases, I can lend a hand. So even in those cases, it can be well intentioned, but that is usually not the result.
Is there actually like an agreed upon sort of textbook definition of design by committee?
Probably.
I don't know. I'll look it up now.
I think a good example of design by committee is, it's quite often you get kind of like, oh, this wouldn't work for this one customer, or this wouldn't work for somebody, and you get then kind of like, you get pissing contests, and kind of like who's shouting the loudest, and whose voice carries the most weight. And you get like, you know, when you're doing designs, you get kind of like these comments thrown at the designs, say like, I know the CEO wouldn't like that, or they get that, I know kind of like, you know, one of your senior stakeholders wouldn't like that, that they just wouldn't like that, without even asking them, is kind of like,
or further clarifying or proving the statement either.
Yeah, and it's an opinion. But with no context then to back that up, and kind of like, why would they not like it? Is it the wrong colour? Is it because I've accidentally drawn a penis instead of a light bulb? You know, kind of like, I know,
not again, Paul.
You know, kind of, it's kind of like, what is the reason they wouldn't like it is better than just somebody going like, oh, the CEO wouldn't like it. And, and it's kind of like, and you hear it all the time, and it's kind of like, it just annoys me.
The irony of calling it design by committee is that that's not design
at all.
It totally is.
Yeah,
it's in fact it's very rarely even democracy. It's just the implication, the insinuation rather, is that you have so many people and they can democratically approach this project.
Yeah.
So I was reading, and that never happens. I just typed into Google, and Wikipedia has, because it's a recognised term, it has its own article on it, and it just starts. And there's 2 points here that I want to raise. So
interesting and meta that you're reading a Wikipedia article about design by committee.
Yeah, which is probably the most referenced thing when justifying an opinion within a design committee.
Well, no, it's a wiki though, isn't it? So it's contributed to by
everyone.
Lots of different people, yeah. Sorry, go
on. So design by committee is a pejorative term. Shall I read this out in a better way? Design by committee is a pejorative term for a project that has many designers involved, but no unifying plan or vision. And it's those 2 points that I really wanted to focus on there. Vision and plan. Because I think a lot of design, what underpins the difference between a committee of designers, a group of designers, and designing by committee is fundamentally the process you have in place, or the processes you have in place, and then the unifying vision that those processes facilitate. I think if you don't have those 2 things clear, then what you create is just an environment where everyone's opinion isn't guardrailed, isn't ciphered down the right channels, and it just becomes an open forum.
There's a game we used to play when I was at art school, which was everybody's probably played it at some point, the Exquisite Corpse, where you fold a piece of paper into...
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I've played it. I never knew it as the Exquisite.
Oh, me neither.
Kind of Victorian schoolhouse did you go to?
For those who don't know, it's the game where you fold a piece of paper, somebody draws the bottom, maybe the feet, then the legs, then the torso, then the head, and you can divide it up depending on what kind of game you're playing. But the amount of times I've sent the first draft of something, or not even the first draft, something that's getting towards a quote-unquote final design, and it bounces around, and by the time it comes back to me, it's unrecognisable. You know, the feet that I gave this creature, it's just morphed into this horrific mutant of a non. It just doesn't represent what the foundations were. It's just mutated to the point that it's no longer recognisable. And I think that is my lived experience so much of doing these kind of projects where the foundations were sound. And I'm experiencing it right now. So I'm working on a project where we've picked up someone's work that began 2 years ago, and the project was abandoned, and we're picking up the project as a new supplier, and we're trying to find out how they got from their noble intentions to what we've inherited. And I think there is a big amount of this, and it's a hierarchical thing, isn't it? Because there are certain people who have that sway, no matter how democratic and agile process is. There's ultimately somebody who gives it approval or disapproval, and I think that is so contrary to the entire methodology of everybody working together and working with users and everything to get it right, that by the time you've just given it to someone else and they say, well, like that, but more like this fag packet drawing I did 6 months ago, make what you've done resemble the fag packet, and it's just, it breaks your heart. It really does. And you've kind of got to rise above it, I think, so often as a designer. But it's
sometimes you don't even get that though, do you? Sometimes you just get no,
nothing worse. Not that.
I expected,
not what we had in mind. Not
could
what
we do something a bit cooler? Is another one, or Yeah, can you make it pop?
Can you make it
Hey!
pop? Hey! And for those playing Faster Horses Bingo, please raise your cards now.
Hey!
Hey! He's in tune.
Yeah, and and they're just not helpful, are they? Those messages, those come. I actually got you mentioned in the Wikipedia quote a democratic kind of, and I think that is one of the problems with UX designers. So if you're in an agile sprint, you are generally the minority on any democratic position. So you've got kind of like your work cut out in any kind of thing, anything there. So, if it goes to a vote and kind of like, oh, should we put our boxes on the left? Should we put them on the right? You're one vote out of, 7, 8 people. And then even then, you've not got the final say on what actually gets developed and what actually gets put into production. And that then comes down to somebody who may not have been part of that process and voted on it, or may not have been privy to any of the nice user research you've done. And then it's distilled along the process, and while I love agile processes, I do feel a lot are weighted against designers and UX people, so that there isn't the majority on that kind of sprint, and you get that distilled message, and you end up with that Frankenstein project.
You experience it as well if you're working in a user-centered kind of approach and you're taking feedback. If you're overly reactionary to that feedback, because if somebody tells you, "Oh, I didn't want the button there," it can so often be, "Oh, don't put the button there, put it anywhere else," and you move it. And then somebody else says, "Oh, I prefer it if the button was over here." And then you move it there. And you kind of got to avoid the tendency to just react to every single piece of feedback you receive as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's where having, again, something in place, a repository to put this feedback, no matter the stakeholder or user or the mechanism that you receive it, so it can be properly digested, is what it comes down to. Because I think if you've got yourself committee of design, then you've got to ask yourself, how are those conversations happening in the first place? How is someone who realistically certainly doesn't have a stakeholder in this part of the process, certainly doesn't have a stakeholder in this part of the product, how is it that they're even in the room right now?
Mm-hmm.
And what is the better way of delivering this information to them? We at where I am now, we had a situation, as we're all aware of, with the brand team, where we weren't able to essentially delineate between. Well, sorry, I say we weren't. I think the actual people in the brand team and the actual people in the UX team were quite comfortable with where the line between UX and brand was in this context. But then there were certain stakeholders above who were very keen to make sure that certain people didn't cross certain lines. And it got to such a point where one of the teams had to, it didn't last very long for obvious reasons, send all of their work over to be reviewed, regardless of what it was. Regardless of what it was, with the intent that brand could review anything brand related. And it just landed on someone's desk. Didn't get reviewed, got ignored, and then got shipped anyway. So it was, again, how did that conversation even happen? What was the fuck up in the process?
Definitely. I could talk more in length about that, but perhaps not. But it is, and I think that's kind of like, a lot of people, they come into design and I think some people come into design thinking it's an easy job to do, or kind of like, it's kind of like, oh, I can draw, I'll be drawing all day and things like that. But there's so much more to it. It's the whole iceberg. And you see the tip of the design, but you don't see the user research underneath. You don't see all the work that goes beneath the surface to even.
But that's
It
the
is,
design
yeah,
process,
it
isn't it? That's
is.
the
And
thing.
then people come in and go, "Oh, the tip is kind of like not as sharp as I wanted it, or it's not as kind of like blue as I wanted it." And it's so easy to,
Yeah, it's got
yeah,
round
it's kind of
corners.
all things like this, and kind of like, well, yeah, but that's that was the direction you gave us like 16 months ago.
I think, yeah. I think the other thing that's missing there as well, because you mentioned what's below the water level. Very often when you've got a design, even the wider user flow is being missed, and the parts of the experience that aren't through specific interface components, but instead the behavior elements or things that are stripped back to make things more intuitive. The people typically who are in, when you're designing by committee, if you've got that happening, usually they'll take a screenshot or there'll be a screenshot taken. This is what happens more often, actually. A screenshot has been taken, not that it's been given, it's been taken, passed around, and then landed back on someone's lap.
With
And
zero context.
It's removed from context. The context of where that page lands in the product, what part of a flow it belongs to, and furthermore, what level the design maturity is, what stage the design's at.
I think I liken this to making a sandwich, and kind of like you wouldn't make a sandwich in a dissected way. You wouldn't say to somebody, right, let's make a sandwich, and kind of like you give somebody the base to make. Then you wouldn't pass that off to somebody else and make the middle, the filling, and you wouldn't pass that then off to kind of like somebody else to put the garnishing on, and then you wouldn't pass that off to kind of like make the packaging, or kind of like the sandwich box you end up putting it in, and like you would never.
Aren't you describing Subway then?
Yeah, but there's
There's a designer, isn't there, in Subway? There's the designer is the customer. And
there's a user there along the whole every step of the process.
In fact, I heard, I don't know how true this is, that the individuals who serve you at Subway are in fact called sandwich artists.
They are, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's a noble profession.
To that metaphor, Paul, the other thing is, if someone asked you to make a sandwich, they'd tell you what they wanted in it as well, right at the start.
Mm-hmm. A brief.
Yeah. If someone asked you to make a sandwich, and then you brought them ham with lettuce and crayons.
My favourite sandwich topping of crayons.
You talked about Henry Ford's production line in the last episode, and the reason the production line works in that way is that the parameters are set and that there isn't variation.
Yeah.
And that works tremendously well for that application.
For that one
If you started saying to those people, and just see what you think when it gets to you. If there's anything you change about what came before, just make a few changes.
Well, that actually,
I don't want to refuse feedback, but that's not the time to. You don't apply that feedback at that point. You have to have a reasoned.
You do it before it hits the factory floor, don't you?
Yeah.
That's it, and that's a point that Paul's made in one of our podcasts in the past. Again, can't remember which because completely forgot.
So many of them now.
Yeah, that's it. They all kind of merge into one in the end. Like chewing on a sandwich you didn't ask for too long, getting crayons stuck in your teeth. That's a faster horse's guarantee. That's not what you said, Paul. What you said was that very often you get a production line, and when you're talking about the way products are manufactured, you fire it off, and you don't bring it back in for a second round.
You don't put it through a different machine.
And very often. to tweak, so it's to recall it and send it back out again, and it's a good example, I think, of how the factory line can work for certain things, but when it comes to software, it's not process enough, because you'll get feedback to come back, and you will get the opportunity to iterate on it. So you need more than just an assembly line to build a product.
I still think the assembly line is a good, because you put those guards in, and then kind of like, if you need to change the factory, you've got to change the factory. You get feedback. Yeah, exactly.
And they do that,
but
as well.
Kind of, if you're on that process, you can't ask to make a Model T Ford, and then at the end of it expect a Tesla. You just can't, because like those parameters have just not been able to kind of like make their way through that factory. So, if someone gives you a parameter, kind of, got to do this is the scope, you've got to kind of like, this is, and, go into the UX files we've just done. Listen now on Patreon. Or in the future.
Or in the future.
Yeah.
On Halloween.
And it's that production line. You've got to kind of like say, the parameters are set, and you can't really change it, but you can. But then you've got to rebuild the factory line. You've got to rebuild that factory process in that way. Yeah.
Everything all right?
It's the internal timer I've got in my head. It goes off at 13 minutes past 6.
Yeah. No, I wanted.
very, very particular.
Yeah. It's the midpoint of Richard Osman's House of Games. That's why.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that's not like some kind of sex thing.
It's a metaphor. Yeah.
It's a BBC Two television show. Well, sorry. Anyway, where were we?
The idea of not changing stuff mid-flight.
Well, the only concern I have around here is that about this is what we're essentially describing there as waterfall.
Yeah. Well,
isn't it?
It is and isn't.
It is and isn't. Processes, and furthermore, what you have there is the construction process basically as a black box, to the point where the manager is managing the staff and not so much the process, the floor manager, to my understanding. And then the processes themselves are actually probably engineered elsewhere in a different headquarters. And they're being kind of trickled down, and you have this black box of production, which is ultimately impenetrable, which is fine for building things, but doesn't necessarily lend itself to any kind of iterative improvement.
Yes.
Well, I thought so, yeah.
I love it. I was just getting distracted by the other day. Nick, you made an hilarious comment on WhatsApp about podcasts, and I was just getting distracted by James, evil Bond villain stroking.
Yeah, for the audio-only listeners of the podcast, there is a cat just wandering around my desk.
For the audio only listeners, there's been like 5 seconds of dead space.
We'll edit that out. We'll fix that in post.
What's the we?
In fact, we'll take all Paul. Paul will edit this out in post. And this bit. And this bit. And this bit. I could just carry on for 12 minutes doing that.
Good point, though, Mark. And I think, and it's that agile. I think there's a blend between that agile process and putting the guardrails on to kind of like protect kind of the design and having. I think really though, it's that vision though, isn't it? And we spoke about that in a previous episode about having that vision of what actually you're going to end up with, and you could be kind of making a jelly, and do you really care what color it is? Do you care what shape it is? but you know you want a jelly in the, and kind of like there's some basic
Well, that's it. It's
fundamentals, isn't there?
Yeah,
that you need to kind of set.
it's specifying at the start what part of the jelly is important. Is it what shape it is? Is it what colour it is? Is it the ingredients? Does it need to be some kind of fucked up vegan approximation of a jelly? Like, but all these things are easily definable before you set off, and not so easy to change halfway through or at the end of the process.
Oh well, I've kind of like, you reveal the jelly and they go, "Ooh, I was actually thinking Victoria Sponge."
Yeah. Or like, our competitors were making a jelly, but it's dick shaped, so we want to capitalise on that new market that's just been created.
So that's that again, though, isn't it? Yeah. It's the if people have an idea in their head, they're not focused on problem solving. They're focused on achieving their solution.
Exactly.
What they imagined. And the individual I mentioned earlier who said, "I just don't think it'll work," was the same individual who would regularly say, "That's not what I had in mind," or "That's not what we'd originally envisaged." And it's like, well, you've jumped 5 steps ahead, having an idea of what it is you want, and it's never going to match up to your expectations like that, because you're always battling with everybody's solution, and solutionizing is a symptom of design by committee, because people say it should be this, it should be that. It's not. It needs to do this. It needs to fulfill this need. The jelly is an example. I want a sweet, cold food that entertains children. Could be jelly. Yeah. Could be it could be one of those little punky ice cream things. Do you remember those? The little penguin with the ice cream in its head.
Yeah.
Yeah, you used
to get kind of fucking fever dream ice cream.
You got those in like Indian restaurants. Like there was also
get them on holiday.
There was a wholesaler who was going to sell them. I think.
Yes, it's a brutalised and endangered species as well. Perfect.
Yeah, but it's I think the solutionizing approach is a symptom of the design by committee process, because people should be feeding back, but they're not always the right people, are they? That's the big issue, is that if you're not speaking to the right people, and again, a project I'm working on, a separate project, or have been working on, I'm not on it anymore, but we were speaking to a lot of people who had a lot of opinions about what it was they expected us to deliver, and not what their customers were expecting.
Yeah.
So our customer's customer was the person who wasn't in the room at the time, and they are in the room now, and all of a sudden our perspective on the project is entirely different, because we're getting it through the lens of the end user and not through the various people who've got an idea of what they want. Because you take all of their separate opinions and none of it makes sense, because none of it's focused on need. It's focused on their ideas of how to meet the need. And none of the user need is present in that discussion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the risk of sounding like a little bit elitist, it's non-designers getting involved in the design process, isn't it? And that's not, when you're talking about users and stuff, obviously they're not designers, but they're an integral part of what you're creating. You talk to the user of what you're designing, and their feedback is essential.
They're part of the process, aren't they, as opposed to the one going through the process.
Yeah, whereas like stakeholders and then other considerations like branding and technology and stuff like that, they're exactly that. They're considerations that you have to have in mind, but they're not an equal voice at the table. And if they are, then I think, unfortunately, they need to have some kind of consideration or knowledge of design and the design process if they want to have a seat at the table.
I agree.
That's an unpopular opinion.
I agree and I disagree. I think everybody can be part of the design process. I think that's got to be your starting point for these things. But
Yeah, exactly. So it has to be a specific part of the journey. It can't be like just dropped like a hand grenade into the middle of the design process.
at a practical level, in terms of implementation and whether that's visual or experiential or whatever it is that you're putting together, I think that needs to be so carefully executed. But there's no reason other people can't have a seat at the table to inform that process. But the actual actions, the direct implications in what you're doing, that's where it's dangerous. That's where, oh, can you just move this to the bottom of the page? Oh, can you just put this up there? Can we just do this? That's where the cracks then show.
Sorry,
because
that's what I was saying, really.
Yeah. That's where you've cut out the real kind of user-driven approach, because all of a sudden it's become that person's opinion, and it's not assured in the way that those other decisions were.
The three most dangerous words in the English language. Can we just?
Yeah. I don't know. What about it's just the way we've always done it?
Yeah.
Oh,
good one. I'm going to ask you about wireframes. I've got my own opinion about wireframes, but
yeah, me too.
Wireframes have been around there, and I won't get into the details, but are wireframes, without getting your opinions first, are wireframes a good tool for UX or not? And do they help or not help with design by committee?
I think it depends what you're trying to achieve. So I, too, as people probably have come to expect now, have a controversial opinion on wireframes in terms of how the majority, or I feel the majority of UX designers might use them, and stakeholders might use them. I think if you're trying to get something over the line to someone who's quite resistant or has usually been a bit of a problem, then a wireframe is a good way to do that, because you roughly approximate something without being too specific. And the fewer specifics you have, the less things those people have to push back against. So, for example, colour, font, logo arrangement, things like that. If that person's a pain in the arse and you show them an actual real website, and then they're going to start stressing about, oh, that's not the right blue, that's the wrong font, why have you spelt this? Why does that say Lorem Ipsum and not our brand name? If you do a wireframe where it's just a box and you're trying to show them that a simple layout, they'll use their imagination and their own biases and whatnot to fill in those spaces. And more often than not, just approve it. So if that's what you're after, a quick buy-in and an approval, and to get something moved further down the line, then I think they're very useful. But if you're working in a system where you've got a fully formed design system and a component library, I don't feel it's like a valuable expenditure of time to create a wireframe when you've just got the components there to drop into like effectively a wireframe anyway. It doesn't have to necessarily be like interactive, but you can use, if you've got a prefabricated like banner or a form or something like that, and you just drop it in, and it is the right colour and it does have the right fonts and stuff in. Why not just do that? I don't know.
That's what I mean. If you've what we're doing at the moment, designing government services, things that will end up on .gov.uk. You've got the assurance that all of those individual elements have all passed.
Yeah,
passed in. They've all been. They're in, and it sounds really. I know we've talked about this before, Nick. That someone you spoke to said if we did everything like this, everything would look like gov.uk, and I think it's a gross oversimplification.
Yeah.
But that's like the function of design. At the end of the day, if something functions really well and there's gets out of the way and the problem is solved more quickly, I don't need a controversial design decision. I don't need reams of someone's artist's expression, or fulfilling someone's fantasy of the way a service will look or function, because that's not the way good design works anyway. I'd rather have a house full of nondescript boxes with just the knobs on the top that do the things I need to do than somebody's expressive crap that doesn't do all those things as well.
It looks nice,
but it looks well. Yeah.
The reason I talk about wireframes, I bring wireframes up because I think they are fundamental to design by committee, and I think where kind of like I think UX kind of borders on this kind of 10 years ago UX people were just doing wireframes, and that was in their job remit, and then you'd have somebody else doing the UI. And my problem with wireframes is you give a wireframe to somebody, and exactly like you say, they fill in the blanks then, and they fill in the colors, they fill in the fonts, they fill in the text and stuff like that. While that is some way, productive, it's also counterproductive to if you were designing another page on a website that needs to have some continuity with the one you designed last week, and then somebody else comes along and goes, oh, I'm going to colour that in with my orange crayon just to piss Nick off because his goldfish died. And that is my problem with wireframes. And also, I think as well, as designers and as we use a tool to do wireframes, we try and make wireframes super pretty and line up and all fit into the nice boxes. So the time you spent doing a wireframe is almost exactly the same time as doing the design. So why not just do the design?
Yeah, exactly.
And then people
just do the design.
Bring people on the journey.
I think it's for me the wireframe question, and I think this is a good example. It's the right tool for the right job, or in this case, the wrong tool for the job in question. Because wireframes can be a conversation tool, and that's because everyone can make them. Everyone can draw on the back of a napkin, but because everyone can do them. Again, it needs to be the right people who understand the right processes and are at the right time, the right touch points to engage with that. And that's all I want to say.
No, go on, finish your thought.
I had a whole cartography analogy lined up, but the moment's gone, so I'll leave it.
Cartography analogy?
Oh, I feel like I need to hear this now.
I mean, well, I was just thinking, you create, it's the first thing that came to my head when you said wireframing, and you create different kinds of maps for different kinds of people. And it depends on the end user. If you're going to send someone a map of your process and you're using the bare minimum cartography line, so it looks like a geographical height map, and you're sending that to someone who's expecting something they can go hiking with, they're just not going to understand. They won't be able to use it. They're going to be dissatisfied, and they'll expect something different. Essentially, it's the same land, it's the same project, it's the same landscape. It's just a different demonstration of that same thing, and it's intended for a different purpose, a different user, and a different part of the process. That was what I was going to. Yeah, that was that.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I really like that. Like, to the uninitiated, a map is a map, but to a land surveyor, a map is completely different to someone who works for the RAC and needs to get down all the A roads of Britain. That's so good. I like that.
I was watching C Series 2, and if you've if you've not watched it,
I've not seen A or B yet, so I'll get
wait for it.
Oh, there we are.
It's where kind of like the world has gone blind, and it's quite quite interesting. Right, and because they had an episode where they had these maps, and they make the maps out of woven materials, so they can feel where the things are. And kind of when you were saying that, Mark, you said what they were discussing. They had kind of like this parlay with a warring faction, without spoiling the details too much. And what happened in that is one side drew a different map than the other. It was still the same land, but they said, oh yeah, we didn't put that on because that's a strategic advantage. And because no one can see, the maps were true to them, and kind of it meant something totally different to the other tribes. And it was really,
that's awesome.
yeah, and it was really interesting.
You've just resold me on that show, because I started watching it, and to me it just looked like Zatoichi 90210. Everyone was like totally gorgeous, and it was just ripping off like a way better version that I've already seen before. So anyway,
what time is it? Yeah,
should we move on now? It's that time again. It's UX Tombola time. No, it's not UX Tombola time.
No.
Yeah.
Well, it is now.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to UX Tombola Hour.
Today we will be hand scrubbing our pet ox, Damien, with a selection of ox-friendly
oils. Then we'll kill him and eat him. Thank you, Damien. Welcome to UX Tombola.
I hope you're using his bones to make some quality gelatin.
I'll grind his bones. I'll grind his bones to make my bread, Paul.
Oh, there you go.
Right. Do we need to do a song, or was that it? Was that my...
I think that was...
I'd say more songs the merrier for me. Yeah.
More songs the merrier. Do we get James? If we were to say, as our special guest and resident musician, do you want to go doing a? What the fuck was that?
James has turned into an ox.
Misread the brief. You watched Tombola. Wrong theme tune, sorry.
Right, well, that's us then. Right, okay, so I need to give the machine a big rattle.
It's not in my room at the minute.
Cool.
Yeah.
Ready?
And yeah.
Go on.
Is that it? Right, okay. Well,
That was such a powerful spin, that one. Oh,
that very thorough spin.
Cool.
It's going now.
Oh.
Let's wait for it to stop. So we've got, on this very real piece of paper that's in front of me, analog clocks.
Oh. Well, first of all, I want to say, for the count, I am extraordinarily for analog clocks. I think batteries are for the weak, and these mechanisms should underpin civilized society.
That is analog clogs.
Clogs. Yeah. All these light up clogs with all the fancy carves in detail. Analog clocks.
Love it.
By analog, we're talking about a face with hands, right?
Yeah. Including or not including the powering mechanism.
Well, I guess that's an interesting clarification, though, because you can have an analog. Why can't any of us say this? Analog clock that's digital, can't you? So look, like on my Apple Watch, that's an analog clock, but it's all digital. So I guess any form.
It's a numerical display over the ring.
So this is
numbers.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I immediately talk about with like digital numbers versus like an analog clock, is that I think an analog clock is easier to tell the time on because that's an image, and you look at it and you recognise the image, and the image tells you what time it is. That's why you don't need numbers on the face unless you're my girlfriend or a 5-year-old. But whereas a digital display with the numbers on it, you have to. And Paul, if it's a digital display with numbers on it, you have to read it and then convert that in your head and understand what time that actually means.
Yeah.
So I think you are exactly right to a point, because I think what we do eventually So what you're talking about there is just basic symbology, isn't it? What the different positions become a myriad of symbols over time. I think what we find is analog clocks eventually do the same. And 0000 becomes 4 circles that mean midnight. 1730 isn't 1730 anymore. That shape becomes 5 in our head. To the point where I sometimes see, it happened the other day, I saw 14 written down, and I thought, oh, 2. And it's just completely subverted.
I'm still not there with that. I know that 1700 is 5 o'clock because that used to be the time that I prayed for all day when I used to work in jobs that I hate, and I used to check my watch every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And anything either side of 17, I have to figure out and convert in my head still as to what is that.
Yeah. But similarly, you have to learn to tell the time. My first and incidentally only girlfriend, not because she couldn't tell the time, but she couldn't tell the time. She could read digital faces. She probably had to do the same translation that you're talking about. But faced with a usual analog clock face, just had no idea. And similarly, the amount of people I've met who can't read Roman numerals, certain clock faces, they can't read either.
The difficulty with that is the overcomplication of the terminology that you've got to learn. It's not knowing what time it is. Like if you look at a clock, you can understand what time it is. The difficulty comes communicating that time to someone else using the pre-approved terminology. So like you saying 22:04 is the same as saying 3:40.
Yeah, 3:40.
Yeah, exactly.
You can say 3:40, but you can't say 3:40.
But you can. Like you still know that there are 60 minutes in an hour, and that 40 minutes means that you had 20 minutes left. And that's absolutely fine. But because somewhere down our history, we've all got together and decided that that's actually wrong and you need to tell it backwards. When you get to past, time starts moving backwards. That's the difficulty. Whereas just looking a kid, the difficult thing to teach to a kid is that stupid terminology, not what time they are looking at.
Yeah. We've got an analog clock in every room in the house, and the granularity of that is what changes as well. Because if I'm looking at a 24-hour digital clock, like now it's 18:39. If I was talking to someone, they said, "What time is it?" I'd say it's 18. Well, it's now 18:40. If I looked at an analog clock face in my house, I'd go, it's about 7:45. Sorry. You know, I look at an analog clock face and I immediately, my granularity just goes out the window and I start, it's almost 7 o'clock. You know, it's that kind of.
I think
that kind of specificity just doesn't exist for me when I look at an analog clock face.
This has a really interesting implication though, because I found that to almost a crippling degree in terms of my own will and agency, won't do something until it's hit
an equal number or something.
An equal number.
Getting out of bed, got to wait.
That's the big one. That's the big one. And then, of course, you spend long enough, or at least I do, with your eyes closed, sighing and lamenting your position in life, that when you wake up, it's 2 minutes past. So it's like, I've got to stay in bed till 1:15 now. It's only logical. Whereas, of course, if I had an analog clock, the ticking would have kept me up all night anyway, so I would never have got to sleep in the first place.
I've just kickstarted a clock that is, it's an e-ink display, and every minute of every day, I think it's every minute of every day, is a quote from a book where a time of day is mentioned.
Oh, that sounds sick.
So there's like a full quote with it in there. I think it's every minute of the day because I can't imagine ever composing that number of quotes with that level of specificity. But sorry, there's a mosquito flying around in this room, and I was keeping an eye on him.
Yeah, I know.
Where
do you live, James? In South America.
Don't think what you've got there really is a mosquito.
So yeah, I think the way we consider time and the way we think about time changes depending on the clocks we've got. And I'm also thinking about other extensions as well. Like I listened to a podcast last week, and somebody was talking about they're going to change the way they teach driving because when I was learning to drive, it was 10 and 2, and 10 and 2 is such an abstraction for somebody, for a young person now, 17-year-old in this day and age. What the fuck is 10 and 2?
Oh.
What even is that? It's like, well, it's it's this bit of the clock and this bit of the clock. And I'm like, yeah, it's like hold your hands with a 45-degree. Imagine you've rotated a circle. You need 45 degrees between both of your hands. It's that level of ridiculousness.
I was reading about this as well the other week, and I know why because they've changed it, because steering wheels are smaller now than they were when we learned to drive. So when we learned to drive, there wasn't really power. There wasn't really power steering, so you kind of needed that. You needed that thing now, but because steering wheels are smaller, it's better to hold it at was it 9:15?
Put it in the Tombola steering wheels, the UX of steering wheels. Get it in there.
Definitely.
But they're changing that because you don't have to hold it anywhere in particular now, do you?
I personally like an analog clock. As I say, our house is full of them, and I think it's one of those things. It will probably go the way of the sundial at some point in history.
But I'm sure they're making a comeback in some form. It's just not to tell the time.
Well, the sun's going to be out a lot more, isn't it? Once the planet warms up. So,
and we're all under 6 foot of water. But I think you actually kind of make that point inadvertently when you talk about a clock that tells you a quote instead of telling you the time of the day, because the time of the day there is a secondary function. You've got the delight of, the aesthetic delight of, something sensorily quite nice. So I think that's what's happening now. Clocks like that are being used primarily as statement pieces, as decoration, as bits of artwork, and you do get some incredible clockwork. I'd say horology is quite an art in itself, and yeah, I think that's what we'll see happen there. As much as a sundial, they'll be used as either a ornamental, or a place to leave a body dramatically posed.
One of the weirdest inventions of recent time was the digital speaker Alexa. In an analog clock, and that kind of really puzzled and confused me why you'd put a digital assistant in an analog clock.
Where does that happen?
Yeah, you see. This clock, fairly cheap, and you can ask it as you would a digital, and it acts as a speaker, smart speaker, and you can ask it questions, and it does timers and things like that for you. And
how far do you go with the analog though? Because I've been working in Nottingham on and off for the last few weeks, and back in my hometown. And a really nice thing that I didn't realise I'd missed was that the council house in the middle of town bongs on the hour and also does the quarter hour bong. So there's like a different jingle at the quarter hour. So when I was walking up towards this office from the train station yesterday morning, I heard the clock going, and I'm going, right.
Oh shit, I'm late. Bloody hell.
But I was like, I listened, and then I was like, oh, that's just 2:45, and it was like an audible link. And in our house, we've got Jannika's great grandfather's old clock, which
literally a grandfather's clock.
Yeah, well, yeah, literally, yeah. And there's a few stories about that. I haven't broken it, but what I've done is
It's actually an Apple Watch.
I took one of the chains too far off the top and now need to reseat it, and that's a pain in the ass. So I'm not doing that. And it wasn't built by the Nazis either, which was a concern I had when we first got it. Because the company who made that clock are centuries old, and they were around in Nazi Germany and did get forced labour to build their clocks. Luckily, this one was built before the Nazis were in power, so
all the best ones were.
So we can sleep safe at night.
No, it was just poorly compensated.
Every time I buy a clock
people.
now, I'm going to think, is this made by Nazis?
I hope Nazis didn't build this. Yeah. But that was a common feature to all analog clocks at one point in time, and at a certain point in history, we decided, the clock shouldn't make that sound every 15 minutes or every hour. We're going to take that out, and it's it's varying degrees of they don't all wind up anymore, and all these other things. We've scraped away, and look at Nick's watch now. It's an analog face on a screen. It's a pale resemblance to what it was before. It's a different
copy of a copy of a copy.
Exactly.
To the point where you forgot why it even looks like that in the first place.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's quite a sad kind of way of putting it. I would have put...
It's just the way we've always done it, Mark.
But, I mean, yes.
I keep tilting my camera, by the way, towards this clock, which I got for my birthday.
Was that made by
No, this one wasn't. This was Danish. This one's Danish. Actually, I'm telling the time on this because the minute hand and the hour hand are almost identical in length. There are no numbers on it, and they're very chunky. Setting the time on it was a pain in the ass.
It's either 9:15 or 3:15.
I'm terrified. The clocks are changing in a couple of weeks, so I need to take it off the wall and change it. I'm not looking forward to that.
Yeah, hang it up at any angle whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that kind of segues us into the last part of this podcast, which is the product advert. But I was just going to say, as you were talking about that, what a nice addition to a very standard analog clock would be that it sets its own time in like daylight savings time.
Mm-hmm. Some do, don't they?
I'm sure they do. Yeah, I'm sure there is ones out there, and like obviously a lot of digital clocks these days set themselves, like your Apple phone and your Apple Watch and stuff do it all automatically, don't they? But if you could find a nice analog clock like that one behind you that you didn't have to take off the wall, or you could even change yourself just by pushing it.
I had an analog smartwatch made by Withings, the company was, and it set itself at when you first turned it on, and it was
like wound, like it was haunted.
Yeah, it was very uncanny just to sit and watch it, and it would change for daylight savings as well because it would sync to your phone. It was very eerie.
If I was to implement that, any change I'd want to happen in the reverse direction, in an anti-clockwise motion, just to really freak people out, because you've never really seen a clock move like that. Yeah. And that's something you don't think about.
I'd sit in my life-size replica of the time machine and like move backwards as it was doing it.
Well, it'd happen every time I got off a plane in a foreign country and I turned the phone back on. It would change itself, and I quite look forward to that moment. So.
That's awesome, isn't it? I love that.
My phone, and I'm sure because my phone's a literal rectangle of shit. My phone tells me the current time when I'm abroad, and then the time back home as well. And I think the majority, if not every single phone since mine and before, does that now.
You say that,
which I think is a nifty feature.
I think that's the end of this segment, isn't it? But I've got something.
I know. Yeah, we could
about clocks.
Well, we could do another clock-based UX.
Clock facts.
Yeah.
UX. Had to get Paul off steering wheels as quickly as possible there, because it was like a red race to a bull with me. Let me talk about them.
We should do a bonus episode where we just continue to bitch about
clocks.
UX.
Especially Nazi clocks.
So I think we've got our Mark Steeler product there, which is a self-winding clock. We just need to think of a terrible one.
Can you make it?
Okay.
Mark Steeler, could you? One of the problems I have with clocks is they're useless when you're looking at them in a mirror, analog clocks. So if you could make a mirror clock, that'd be amazing.
Okay. I've got the perfect product for you, Paul Wilshaw, made specially for you, Mr. Wilshaw, today. And it is the trans-dimensional reversal clock.
Yeah.
Tell us more, Mark.
I'm glad you asked. So this clock always appears the right way, but never ticks the right way. And this will always keep you very alert at what time it could be, which will always keep you looking at a better clock. Fundamentally, though, you'll always be thinking foremost about the time. And we've even got a slogan. 6:30. It's the best time of day, hands down. Thank you. That's the trans-dimensional clock. Thank you, Mark. You're very welcome.
Incidentally, I am about to to kickstart a clock. It's got hundreds of times on its face that it isn't, and it's your it's your job to deduce what time it is by what time it isn't.
That's fucking amazing.
I told you that story that time, didn't I? Where that clock had been stopped for months, and I finally went to put a new battery in it, and I put the new battery in, looked at a functioning clock to see what time it was to set it, and it was that time. So it was put the battery in at the very time of day that it stopped.
Okay.
So something equally as creepy as that, Drew has just sent me a screen grab whilst we were doing this. Nothing to do with clocks, but we're at the end of the podcast now, so it's a free for all. She just sent me a screen grab of a.
No.
Whoa!
That is.
Dun, dun.
It's on a mind.
It knows.
It's on a mind. It's in a subconscious.
Well, it's not that. It's that we've recently diversified our portfolio into word searching apps.
Yeah.
Great value.
That was the North Star of version 8.
Yeah.
We're definitely not leaving this in, are we?
Pivot from automation and put word searches.
So there was two things I really wanted to mention. The first one was a creepy clock thing that happened to me. So I don't know if you remember 2016. Doggle, shush. Oh, it worked. At 2016, the world was meant to... Oh, no, was it 2012?
2012, yeah.
2012, the world was meant to end. I was in college. And we did a countdown. There was a Google countdown on for the world to end. And obviously, believe it or not, nothing happened. It just started to tick up again. And then my music teacher, rushed into the room. I was like, this is really weird. This clock has just stopped now.
Whoa.
And that was it.
I've got a screen grab somewhere on like a backup somewhere that's now 10 years old almost. And it was on the 11th of November 2011 at 11 seconds past 11 minutes past 11. And I'd only just realised that it was that time, and I opened the system clock on my my Mac, and I thought I'll just screen grab this when it comes over. I'll just get it. Just I don't know, just so I remember. I screen grabbed it, and when the screenshot loaded up, it was 12.
A fucking hatchet job.
That's another episode in the bag. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred streaming service and follow us on Twitter at FasterHorsesUX. Catch you in a couple of weeks for another episode, and we'll see you soon.